All right. So our guest tonight is actually a friend of mine. I met her at basketball. How many months ago?
5, maybe?
5 months ago. But she's really great, really fun to play with. And we have a slide here with some of her points about her life. I'll just read the top one. She's an Emmy-nominated director, producer, and digital video editor. She'll tell you more. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you summed up a lot of my important parts. Filmmaker, girl jock, that's it. Done. Good friend. So I want to be clear, I have 30 minutes to present the talk and then we'll have some time, 30 to 45. Okay, I'm going to do a timer just because I do tend to go on and I want to make sure that we leave time for chatting at the end of it. So this initial slide that you'll see is the one I used for this talk, which I give in various incarnations because this is really my passion, the idea of who is on screen, who makes the films and the shows that we watch on screen. I think it's a really important artistic and political question, and it's one that whoops, is that for me? Do you know?
No, that's me, don't worry about it.
Okay. It's one that I've been pondering since I became a filmmaker, which was about 20 years ago. I came to filmmaking, did not major in it in college. I was a psychology and Chicano studies major with a Spanish minor in college. And after college, I worked on issues of violence against women and girls for many years as a community organizer. And it was through that work on a small grant that we had that I decided, hey, let's produce a video. That's a great educational tool and it'll show people the kind of work that we're doing in the community. And so I was the client on a film shoot for a nonprofit, and I was about 27, and the film director was a 30-year-old woman. And I'd never seen that before. I'd never seen a woman directing a project. I just did it, you know, in the world, if you can see it, you can be it, and I had never seen it. And so I was just deeply intrigued by this woman and what she was doing, and started to really pay attention to her over the course of that shoot. And I realized that she was a good leader and she was a really good communicator. She was a decisive decision maker. She was good with people. And I sort of started saying to myself, well, I do all this. I have all those skills, right? I have all those abilities and a deep love of film. Like this has been my passion since I was tiny. My dad used to take me to the movies from before I could read subtitles, and he would read the subtitles to me. I'm sure we were very irritating to other people in the theater. But that's how, you know, my sort of entree into this world was like, I was so little, I couldn't even read yet. And my dad would take me to foreign films. And so I'd always loved it. And when I kind of came to that epiphany moment in my 20s that, oh, maybe this is something I could do. I remember several of my friends were like, yeah, like, how had that not occurred to you before? So I started taking classes at a community college to see if it really was a spark, to see if I had any technical ability. None of my work prior to that moment had involved machinery. It hadn't involved computers or cameras in any sort of way. Happily found out that I am quite technically inclined. Another thing that we don't know unless we're given an opportunity to try to flex those muscles. And as I say, I already knew that I was creative and a pretty good leader and all these other parts. So I decided to go to film school. I used the community college class to make a project to get into film school. And I got into San Francisco State, where I got my MFA. So a big part for me of why I got a master's degree, because you don't have to. This truly can be an apprenticeship for, you know, profession. You can learn on the job. You can learn to be a cinematographer. You can learn to be any parts of this. But I love teaching. And it's always been a major focus for me, just in all of my professional work. So I knew that if I had that master's degree, I'd also be able to teach at the university level, all the way down to community-based organizations. And that's in fact what I've done. So what you see today is a little bit of Professor Tricia, and it's a little bit of filmmaker Tricia, although I'm focusing much more on sort of giving a talk on an issue that's really important to me, which is shining light on power and storytelling. So that is my intro to what we're going to be doing today. I'm not going to take up time showing you a lot of my work, although I can happily share my portfolio with you, and you can see my work if you're interested. But these are just some screenshots from some pieces that I've directed. I started out being not sure whether I wanted to do documentary film or narrative film, right? Narrative film being scripted work that you work with actors documentary being sort of documenting real life. So I did both. The image of these two young women was a narrative film that I wrote about teenage girl basketball players, right? They say, write what you know, produce work about things that you know about. So I really wanted to do a piece that was about two girls of color who were not pregnant or in a gang. Wrote a revelation, right? At that time, I felt like I'd seen so little and I'd seen so few films about women athletes. So it was a little bit of a hybrid in that I went out to local colleges and I started scouting basketball games to see if I could see any young women that looked like they had to be able to play basketball for my script, because basketball was really central. There's a lot of play in the piece. And then I reached out to the coaches of the teams and said, by chance, are any of these young women also in your drama department, in your theater department? Anybody have an acting background? And like the kismet came together. I found these two young women, one of whom was at San Francisco State, one was at Berkeley. Both were theater majors and really good ballers. So with them, I co-wrote the script. I had the sort of outline of the story. They helped flesh out the script. By then I was 30 and the characters were teens, and I knew there was no way I was going to write authentic teen dialogue. So I worked with them to really try to create a script that felt very natural through a lot of improvisational. I had them play a lot of basketball together before we started shooting, because I wanted them to have that comfort and familiarity on the screen. So that ended up being my thesis film, the first sort of, or my final sort of project in school that kind of launched me into the world of filmmaking. And I mentioned that one in so much detail because I never made another narrative film after that one. Narrative films are kind of a different beast. I do like them. I love watching them, but it requires bigger crews. I had a crew of about 20 people to make that film. And in my documentary work, I really like to keep it small. Sometimes I'll run with just 2 or 3 people. Sometimes I'll have a crew of maybe 10 if we're doing like really spectacular lighting on set, which you can see with some of those projects, you know, they're on location with really beautiful lighting. This is Jimmy Yamaichi, and we interviewed him at the Japanese American Museum in downtown, in Japantown, about his internment experience. He was like 91 when we interviewed him. So he was a young man. He was like 19 when he was interned. So he was able to share really detailed stories about that time in his life. So if you take a look at some of the screenshots from my films, you'll probably catch on to a few aesthetic similarities, a few things. What do you notice about my projects?
It's about the people.
It's about people. Yeah. What else?
People of color.
People of color mostly.
Women, a lot of women.
And women, right? So if I were to say, you know, if I do say, what is my mission as a filmmaker? I'm really committed to making stories about women and girls, almost exclusively about people of color when I'm in charge of making choices about who I'm interviewing and what kinds of projects I'm making. And then a lot of my work is also in Spanish, or bilingual in Spanish and English. And that feels really true to who I am. And it feels really true to my mission of creating these images on screen that we don't see very often, right? Very quickly, just wanted to show you my filmmaking manifesto that I wrote when I was in film school. I had to write out what my thoughts were about how to do what I was planning to do. And so I did this, what's it called? Is it when you goes down, spelled celebrate mistakes? That's like a
Acrostic.
acrostic, yeah. Right, so all of the sort of things I thought were important to me as a young filmmaker: celebrate accomplishments, emotions matter, let go. Like I was really trying to learn how to do this incredibly detail-oriented, ruling work, but also be like calm and in the moment and yet organized, right? Which is really kind of a difficult thing to balance. Build on people's ideas. I'm like I said, I'm an athlete. I'm a team player. It's really important to me that everybody on my set feels like they're involved and they get to have a say and they're really involved in what we're doing. Resist the obvious and embrace it. Always stay true to my politics. I turn down a lot of work now as a freelancer. If there's any whiff that it might be something that I personally would not stand behind. I don't sell my video skills for hire. I am very clear that it has to really meet my politics and my mission. Life is too short for me to make work that isn't in total alignment with who I am. So I'm very, very clear on that, and was back then. More women behind the camera and on screen, which is funny because I was looking at this tonight and I thought that was 20 years ago and that felt so primary to me. And now that would absolutely and is expanded to include people of color and the LGBTQ community as well. But at that time, my focus was really on women filmmakers. And there may have been intersectionality there for sure, but I wasn't as explicit in my mission. And that's really grown and expanded as I have as a filmmaker, right? I can't contradict myself. I am large. I contain multitudes. That's a Walt Whitman quote. And for me, it's like, this is messy and complicated. And I need to be able to try to experiment and explore and try all these different parts of who I am as an artist. And I want to give myself permission to do that. I'm also, you know, a bicultural woman living in this culture. And like, there are lots of different parts of who I am. And I'm constantly sort of exploring that. Ask people I respect for their opinions. At this point in my career, that's about me being a really committed mentor. Like I really try to work with a lot of young people, both my students, but also sort of young 20-somethings and 30-somethings to help them figure out how to do this because it's kind of hard to do. And I want to just sort of encourage, keep laughing, encourage risk-taking and subtle rhythms. So that was Tricia 20 years ago, kind of laying out who I felt like I wanted to be as a maker. And it feels pretty accurate. I feel like it's still pretty right on. So that's my introduction. Besides the basketball and the Emmy-nominated thing, that's who I am. So I'm gonna ask you to do a few interactive things while we're talking, because that's the teacher in me and I can't help myself. What movie or TV show had an impact on you during your childhood? So what I want you to do is talk to a neighbor. And folks on Zoom can either write it in the chat or I'm not sure how we can pair them up.
Oh, we can have, let's see.
So get talking, folks. We only have 30 minutes. Talk to your friends.
For me, it was Grizzly Adams.
You're younger than me. It was like Down to me and Beaver, that kind of stuff.
You know what? I love Leave It to Beaver. That's where I took a lot of my values from. I grew up watching that and I like
That's cool.
the responsibility that they had to
You know what it
take. I
was?
like how they came together.
Yeah.
It was,
You know, they make a joke about, oh, the 50s were not Leave It to Beaver family, but why not? You can be whatever you want.
Oh, yeah.
Very much.
Yeah.
But then
Yeah,
something I looked for.
She was hot.
Thought it should have been like that.
That's reality.
But no, wasn't anything like that.
No, then I went from Grizzly Adams to Family.
Yeah.
I loved
Me
Family.
too.
Loved Family. Probably in love with Christy McNichol at the
Yeah.
time.
That's okay.
But I was also in love with like Garrett. And so, but again, for me in that case, it was about the interactions of people and seeing
Yeah.
something normal because my life was so not
Yeah,
normal.
I'm here.
And then it switched to Love Boat.
Yeah, like.
And I just
Oh,
loved
Star Trek, baby.
Yeah.
Do we have some answers on Zoom as well?
Yeah, so it
Will and
says,
Grace did it for me
let's
too.
see,
Mhm.
this
Kinda
girl
helped.
says, I Love Lucy
Will and
No.
Grace is amazing.
and A League of Our Own. Oh, man.
Mhm.
Yes.
And then, it was Star Trek, baby. That's what I say. I said Star Trek also.
It's insane.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, y'all, let's bring it back together. Because to me, we can talk about this all night and it's super, super fun. I heard Stand and Deliver, Star Trek, A League of Their Own, Grizzly Adams was one of them. And I heard you guys explaining why it touched you or spoke to you. I also heard you thought the characters were hot. All valid reasons why we would like,
And live for Christy McNichol.
Oh, yes.
right, the 70s Tom girl, right?
Oh,
Tomboy.
never better.
Yeah. So I put a 10 that had an impact on me. This was like a Facebook challenge that I did a while ago. And yeah, there are girl athletes that really spoke to me. Tatum O'Neal was the only girl I'd ever seen on screen being a tomboy. And so I was like, yes, she's me. That's who I am. That's so
Whale
important to me. Whale Rider, also that a young girl of color who's like super badass and is chief of her tribe and goes through all kinds of trials and tribulations. Love and Basketball was one of my very favorite movies. Finally, Gina Prince Bythewood produced a movie about female athletes that was so good and I loved it. Sound of Music is something I used to watch every year with my mom repeatedly, so I have a real emotional heart connection to it. Moonlight for me is a more contemporary one, but just I'd never seen anything like Moonlight in my whole life. And to see queer representation of people of color that was beautiful and soulful and so gorgeously shot and told such a vulnerable and heartrending story. Loved that film.
Now I want to go rent the movie.
You should. It's amazing. It's amazing.
And the
So
piano.
there's the full list. And The Piano is directed by Jane Campion, who is one of my very, very favorite film directors. She just won for Power of the Dog,
Yes.
which has some wonderful queer themes in it. So if you haven't seen that yet, it's on Netflix. You should definitely check it out. So on this list, it's like an even split between female and male directors. But the point for me is most of us have pieces that are emotionally resonant, and often it's because we see ourselves in it for various reasons, but we see ourselves in it. And so the fundamental thing here is we need more representation where we see ourselves, right? So I'm going to get a little bit into the politics of that. I'm going to have you hold on these answers, but I'm going to have you ponder what famous actor would play you in the movie of your life. Let you think about it. Some of us are going to get stuck because people who look like us aren't on screen very often. Okay? That's very common when I'm talking to women, when I'm talking to people of color, when I'm talking to people in the queer community. We haven't seen enough folks who look like us in Hollywood, so who the heck are we going to cast? And you may have an answer, and I'm happy to hear it, but I just like to pose that question to people because if I'm in a room full of white straight men, they're all picking George Clooney, and I'm like, really? Are you actually that good looking in your head? Because I don't know. But there are lots of choices, right, for them to draw from. So I'm going to put that out there. You can think about it.
You know, I also think it's hard though, because they focus so much on the leading characters that become the A-list, and the supporting characters are lost.
Yeah.
Those actors that are the character actors that work for 30 years and you don't know their name.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And so one of the things I do is make a point to know who those people are, right? I look them up, I watch the credits, I Google them. Also, it's really common in our culture for people to associate a movie with the famous actor
Yes.
rather than the director. And I'm constantly redirecting my students and people I chat with to be like, oh, who's it directed by? Because that's whose vision it is. That's what you're seeing on screen. Not that George Clooney was in it or that it's got Meryl Streep, right? Whose vision is it? Because that person is in charge of all the parts. Right? It's like the author of the book. Right? So I'm going to do this with you quickly. I want to make sure we have plenty of time, but this is something I like to do when I'm first introducing the idea of media advocacy, media literacy, as we're watching stuff together, as you're watching stuff at home. I want to sort of insert some of these thoughts into your mind, not just for pure entertainment, although I love pure entertainment. How are you responding to this material as a marginalized person, as someone who's part of the LGBTQ community and might have other intersectional identities as well? So this is something I call the media privilege checklist. I'll read it out loud and you can all answer in your heads what your answers might be. When TV or movie characters have the same gender or sexual identity as I do, it is not seen as controversial. That could be true or false for you. I can name a TV show or 5 where most of the main characters have the same gender or sexual identity I do. I can name a Hollywood director or 5 who has the same gender or sexual identity that I do. I rarely see jokes on TV or in movies mocking my gender or sexual identity. When a lead character in a TV show or movie has the same gender or sexual identity as I do, it's hardly noticed or commented on by anyone. When a celebrity of my same gender or sexual identity wins a big award, their identity is not excessively pointed out. So I'm going to guess that for most of you, it's like, I wish, right? And it's a really interesting thing for me to be in a room that is diverse in the sense that there are more mainstream folks in the room and they're just like, yeah, I can list off a bunch of folks, or wow, that has never occurred to me before, or no, I've never seen my group be made fun of. Whoa. So I just like to sort of bring that forward as you're thinking about what you're watching. And for folks who are interested in making film and television shows, I want to really say, like, this is then the mission, this is the directive. Let's make sure that in the next generation, we can name 5, 10, 15 directors who reflect back ourselves right? That's really, really, really important that the narrative is changing and shifting. And it is changing and shifting. Anybody who's in this room who's over 40, 50, 60, like had very few representations on screen, and it's better. And part of why it's better at this time is because television and streaming television has opened up a lot of opportunities and made it cheaper and more accessible for filmmakers of color, LGBTQ folks to make stuff, right? Because it's always about the dollar. It always comes back to the economy in large part. And we're in a culture that is bringing up these conversations and pushing these issues, you know, hashtag Oscars so white. It's in the cultural conversation now, not nearly enough. And the data is depressing, but I'm glad we're looking at the data. This may have been something nobody even talked about 10 or 15 years ago, right? So I pulled up some statistics. The USC Annenberg School, it's at University of Southern California, they have what they call an inclusion initiative, and they do fantastic research on issues of diversity. So I just pulled some of their stats from the LGBTQ community. So this was from Netflix films and series just for 1 year, 2018, 2019, but I like it because it's pretty contemporary, right? So gay, lesbian, transgender, film leads 4%, main cast 4.3%, speaking characters 2%, and that's to your point. Sometimes they'll be like the wacky sidekick or the gay best friend or the lesbian sister or whatever, but they're very, very minimized in terms of who they are, in terms of complexity as a character. And sometimes they don't.
Or they're exploited,
Or they're exploited.
like my best friend's wedding.
Mhm.
With a gay character is the outrageous one.
Right. So 2% speak at all, right? And then in series, 1.1% are leads, LGBTQ leads, 6.1% of the main cast, 3.3% of speaking characters in series on Netflix. And I have these kinds of statistics for multiple different marginalized groups, but I think these are pretty compelling. So this is about film. In 600 films that they analyzed, there were 26,618 speaking characters, and you can see over the years, creeping increase from 14 to 1919 for gay. We went from 12 to 45 speaking characters, woot woot. And then you can see the numbers for lesbian went from 4 to 10, bisexual from 5 to 3. We dropped in the bisexual category, and transgender from 0 1 year to 3 in 1919. So of the top 100 films, 78 had no LGBTQ characters at all, and 94 had no female identified LGBTQ characters. It tends to be that when there is representation, it's of white men, white gay men on screen. So I like to show the data. Some folks are data heads rather than, you know, narrative story people, learners, and also it's very depressing. And also we can work to change numbers, right? It gives goals. It gives a place where the community can really say, oh my goodness, this problem is laid bare. And it's not just something I feel or something I think. Here's the data, right? I'm going to shift gears a tiny bit and talk about a concept that really helps me sort of discern and judge and think about what it is I like to watch and why. So how many of you have heard of the male gaze? Any of you studied film? Okay, so I'm going to teach you this real simple concept that is by feminist film critic Laura Mulvey in 1975. So this is an idea that's been around for many, many, many years, more than 40 years. She wrote about the male gaze in a piece she wrote called Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. It's very commonly accepted in film studies at this point. The bottom line is, it's a way in visual arts and literature to depict the world and women from a masculine point of view, presenting women as objects of male pleasure. Part of the question is who's looking, who's watching. I posit the question, who's doing the making, who's behind the lens, who has control of that camera, right? And thus the gaze is for that person who's then writing it large for the typical audience, right? And in this case, the default target audience is heterosexual men. So fundamentally, films and advertisements have been created to give pleasure to heterosexual men. That's what it's been for as long as television and film have existed. That's pretty much been the default. Now, how many of you know Joey Soloway, formerly Jill Soloway, came out as they were lesbian and then came out as non-binary. The showrunner for the show Transparent. Have you heard of the show Transparent? Got a lot of press and lots of years, mostly for good reasons, for some complicated and complex reasons as well. Such a talented filmmaker. I love their work in many, many ways, but Transparent is the one that's kind of known. So they came up with an alternate gaze. And talk about evolution of ideas. At the time, they were female lesbian identified, and so they called it the female gaze. That was their worldview at that time. I suspect that now they would call it a queer gaze. I think it's probably evolved given what I know about them as a maker, but I'm going to share with you at that time, the way they posited it was the female gaze is an alternative to the male gaze, right? It's not a camera trick, it is a privilege generator. So going back to this media checklist that we all did, where we're kind of on the outs, we don't have a lot of privilege. We don't get to create or see ourselves. So Joey Soloway is saying, this is my camera is a privilege generator. It's storytelling to get you on somebody's side. It says, you'll be on my side. It's my camera. It's my script, right? My words. I'm in control of this story. And I want people to see the female gaze as a conscious effort to create empathy as a political tool. So this to me is at the fundament of everything I do as a maker, and so important. If you watch a piece of art and it creates empathy inside of you for those characters, that's it. That's what we want. We want you to understand someone's lived experience a little bit or a lot. We want you to see yourself reflected back. We want you to have empathy, right? So literally in this quote, called political tool, I call it as a tool for social change. So the female or queer gaze is a powerful tool for social change because we're building empathy. And so their point is it's arresting away of the point of view, changing the way the world thinks and feels about women, I would say, and queer people when they move their bodies through the world, feeling themselves as the subject, right? You are the center of the story. You're not an object to be looked upon. So that's a super radical redefinition of the gaze.
I could challenge that.
I'm sure you can. Go for it.
Well, and when I look at it, it seems adversarial instead of freeing.
Okay.
Because if we're looking at seeing the error in the male gaze in objectifying a gender, I would see the goal as being more agendered and then looking at equivalency and equality and setting the world the way it should be, instead of flipping it and saying, let's look at it from the other side. We would say, I'm going to give you the perspective I want you to see, but it doesn't have to be gendered if we're looking at equality between each other.
So I think that you are on the same page as Joey Soloway, and I think the language in this is antiquated. That they went female to male to try to flip the script. And that's why I don't think at this time that's the language they would use anymore. The point is, I want you to see me.
Right.
And the me can be any of us from any of our perspectives. It's saying we're going to move away from what has been as the only way to see the world. And we're going to present to you alternate views that are more diverse, more complicated, more complex. So I actually think you're saying the same thing. And you're right, removing a gender binary from it is, I think, the way to go. And just to say it's a range of viewpoints, but they generate from the makers. And then that means we need a bunch of different kinds of makers, right? We don't just want white men making our projects anymore. We want all of us to be able to make our projects.
Absolutely.
So keep that in mind, this idea of a different kind of gaze, whatever language we apply to it. Maybe we don't have to use an adjective, right? The new gaze, maybe. And it makes me laugh because I always used to think that they were saying the gays, meaning like the gay people. When they would talk about it in film school, and it would always take me like 3 clicks to be like, oh, they're talking about the movie thing, not the gays writ large.
Gaze.
Yeah. So I wanted to say, and I wasn't sure what the age range of the group here tonight would be, but I've pulled a few images that I know were historic LGBTQ representation that really mattered. And I'm curious to hear from you, what else spoke to you? What mattered to you at some point? What did you see on screen where you were like, Yay, finally, thank you.
Orange is the new black.
Yeah, I have that in the next slide, but yes.
Please for me.
Yeah, we got Glee.
And it's
For
really,
sure.
is that Modern Family?
It's Modern
I
Family.
could not stand it because of the stereotypical people in it. The guy who's the lead in it, he plays the same character from Married with Children. He plays that stereotypical kind of guy.
Yeah.
And it drove me batshit. I wouldn't want it. I couldn't stand it. Which is funny because you have the two characters, the gay characters with the children and
Yeah.
child and stuff. Couldn't stand it.
So it may not have spoken to you personally,
Oh,
which
it
is
did.
totally
It spoke to
fine.
me.
But I think because it was a mainstream network show, for a lot of people, it's the first time they ever saw a gay couple parenting.
Yeah. Well,
So it had an impact.
And that could make it dangerous because then it's playing into the stereotypes
yes, but
of
that's what
differences.
that's what really bothered me was it was playing in, and it was just gay, it was the dumb Hispanic, the female, and I just, oh man, it drove me crazy.
See, that's what was so good about Orange is the New Black, because it was
Yeah.
every size, every.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah,
everybody.
yeah.
Power was all over the place.
Yeah.
So other images up here that I just plucked, Will and Grace, The L Word, Brokeback Mountain, which was a super, super powerful movie. Yeah.
Queer as Folk was
Queer as Folk was
liberating.
fantastic. Right? So those are some that I pulled, and then I just did like a whole bunch of things that are easier to get now. And part of it is this idea that we have these streaming television options. So there's been a little bit of an explosion. I don't want to overstate it because you saw the data. It's not like it's fixed, but we've made some solid progress in the area of representation on screen.
And there's really good representation in mainstream shows now too, on
Mhm.
major networks. Like just even seeing previews, you're seeing lesbian and gay characters in Station 19
Mhm.
and in 911.
Mhm.
and all of the different shows. The Grey's Anatomy without sensationalizing it.
And NCIS Hawaii.
Right, so that's awesome. Like you all just rattled off like, oh, this one and that one. And are you thinking a character's hot again? Is that sound
Yes.
here? I'm trying to get you to think political theory. You're like, hot on that one. That's fair. That's fair. So, no talk from me is complete without sort of saying like, yes, it's a problem, but what are we going to do about it, right? What's the call to action? How can we make change? So this is from that same Annenberg Center for Diversity and Inclusion, and they talk about things like collective action. I do want to really say very clearly to you that as consumers of media, your dollars matter. That's what speaks to Hollywood. That's what speaks to the television industry. And I'll tell you as an example, for me, if a woman directs a film as a political act, I will go see it in a theater on opening weekend, and I will pay full price every time, because I know that my dollars matter, and I know they're going to be looking at box office grosses for that first weekend. So you can apply that to any group that you really want to support, right? The first time it's a queer director or it's a Latino, whatever it is, that really matters. So collective action of that kind is kind of easy, super fun, and doable, right? So vote with your dollars when you can, support stuff. I mean, I'm constantly like telling friends about something I've seen, and they know that's kind of my jam and it's what I care about, but like, people are usually kind of interested in the entertainment industry, right? So I'll be like, it's the first time, Lena Waithe's just the first African-American queer woman to ever be nominated for an Emmy for, Master of None. And I talk about that and I put up clips of her. And like, anytime something happens that matters to me, I just let people know, because most folks aren't really that tuned in. So you can just be that voice that's kind of reminding and celebrating and saying, hey, how cool. Some of this is geared more towards the industry. Company-wide inclusion policies and inclusion riders are a thing that they're encouraging famous movie stars to do, where they refuse to be in a show, in a movie, unless the crew is balanced in very specific ways. So some folks are saying half the crew must be women, half the crew must be people of color, because they actually, again, because of the money, have the power to really move the needle. And they're like, oh, God, we really want to have Benedict Cumberbatch in our thing. We have to do what he says. Now, what he's asking for is the right thing anyway. But unless it's mandated by folks that can move the almighty dollar, it's hard to accomplish. So a lot of folks are including inclusion writers where they're saying in their own contract what they're looking for on a set. Target inclusion goals, that's something that's happening at the studio level on down, where people are saying like, we'd like to have this number of folks, which I always think is a good idea, because if we don't ever set any goals, it's impossible to meet them. And then in the far right corner, there is one that really matters to me: support nonprofit organizations training new filmmakers. As a teacher, as a mentor, like I work with so many amazing kids of color, so many young queer people. They have so much to say. They're so creative. They're digital natives, and they just need to be given an opportunity to do it. So there are a lot of organizations locally, and like right now I'm working at Lincoln High School, which is a public high school. So that's what we have to do, right? That's what we have to do. So we have to train the next generation of young people to give them these opportunities. So to sum it all up, media literacy, keep it in mind. Who makes the media? Who is the target audience? And are you supporting media that matters with your dollars? Those are the biggies I want you to take away. We really want to produce more authentic stories. And one of the ways to do that, or the way to do that, is to hire. If you have any hiring power in your jobs, in your organizations, at your places of work, please have that be in the mix of who are you hiring. I hear all the time, there aren't enough qualified women, there aren't enough qualified people of color, there aren't enough qualified folks from the queer community. Bullshit. Yes, there are. You just need to look, and you need to find the networks that can help you find the folks you need to help you tell those stories, right? So hire and empower women, people of color, and LGBTQ people to tell their stories. So those are my calls to action to you all.